Good day and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And there has been more information obtained from that Pentagon document release that had occurred over the last several days. It now appears we have received new information about some of the weapons that have been provided to the Ukrainians, namely specifically the JDAM, and how effective the JDAM has been since it has been delivered to the Ukrainians. And not only the JDAM, what we're learning as well is that the Russians are starting to adapt to even systems such as the HIMARS. And what we're seeing, and what this document release is saying, is that the Russians have the ability to jam the U.S. GPS, especially those weapon systems that are reliant upon global positioning satellites. And it does appear that at least in the initial phases of the use of the JDAM by the Ukrainians, and we also believe it's just not the JDAMs, but also the small diameter bombs that are being fired from the HIMARS are being affected by whatever electronic warfare systems the Russians have deployed. And it does appear that, at least initially, some of these systems are becoming less effective than initially anticipated against Russian forces. Furthermore, we're starting to see the Russians, again, adapting to especially the HIMARS. So we have seen new Russian systems take to the field, such as the Tornado. We have seen the Russian multiple launch rocket system, the Tornado, that has been deployed. But it has also been upgraded with newer, longer range rockets that actually now surpass the baseline range of the HIMARS. Now, how many of those have been deployed by the Russians at this point, it's difficult to say. But again, you can see what is happening. You can see this chess game that is evolving in this conflict. As the Ukrainians deploy weapon systems, you kind of see the Russians respond. As the Russians respond, you also see the Ukrainians and their Western-backed allies respond as well. But it's interesting to see that the Russians have been able to jam GPS. We do know that a large-scale missile attack, a decapitation-type missile attack, has always been a concern for the Russian Federation. That is one area in which, as Russian war planners have gamed a possible high-intensity conflict with the West, that is one area in which they felt they were possibly unable to initially defend against. Again, against a large-scale cruise missile and precision-guided weapons attack against targets wherever in the Russian Federation. But obviously, this conflict is giving the Russians direct applicable experience on how to defeat some of these weapon systems. And again, at this point, I think it's safe to say, now that the information is out, we know that American Special Operations Forces are deployed in Ukraine. We know that even more British Special Operations are deployed in Ukraine. Polish Special Operations Forces are deployed in Ukraine. So probably not too far off the mark when the Russian state, well, we're not just fighting the Ukrainians, we're also fighting the Western allies as well. Now, obviously, we're not seeing large-scale Western NATO armored units deployed into Ukraine. But we are seeing teaching missions, we are seeing special forces missions that are assigned to these Ukrainian units and are assisting these Ukrainian units. So again, not too far off the mark in terms of what the Russians are saying. They feel like they're fighting the West, and they're fighting many Western weapons. They're fighting Western intelligence, and yes, they are to an extent fighting Western special operations forces that are on the ground. And it's more likely than not that there are special operations forces very, very close to the line of contact where some of the heaviest fighting is taking place. It's highly likely that the United States has deployed stealth assets flying over Ukraine, watching Russian forces, watching Russian maneuver forces, seeing where Russian forces are building up, and then allowing Ukrainian long-distance assets to engage some of those Russian forces. So again, as we continue to dissect this Pentagon leak, again, the whole issue with the JDAMs is now coming to light, in which possibly not as effective as first thought. Now, with that being said, there's probably not a lot of JDAMs being deployed against Russian forces, given that the Ukrainians don't really have a very tangible air force presently. A lot of the air capability of the Ukrainians have been degraded by Russian forces. But again, when the Ukrainians have used the JDAMs, those JDAMs have either missed or something else has happened to them where they just didn't work, and we're not sure what that is. That has reportedly been corrected in terms of the JDAMs not detonating on target. However, they're still facing the issue of the Russians jamming the global positioning satellites and making the JDAMs ineffective. While at the same time, the Russians still have full use of their GLONASS system deployed in the theater of operations as well. GLONASS is just the Russian version of the GPS system. In all likely, I would not be surprised if the Chinese were opening up their system, their GPS system, as well to the Russians. So that's kind of where we sit for today. Not a lot of changes on the front line. We're continuing to monitoring the situation. We'll do a later debrief in terms of what is happening along the line of contact, in terms of the prospects of offensive operations, continued defensive operations by both sides, and more to come very, very soon. And a final note I wanted to leave off with, and maybe some of you are watching current events here in the United States, but I need to say this. With so many really good quality micro brews, micro beers, imported beers, why on earth would any American drink a Bud Light? Have a good day.